Hello everybody, my name is Rachel and welcome to my channel Kalanati. Today I'm going to do my third batch of 5 books as I attempt to review all the things I read in January because it was a really good reading month for me. I'm going to start off with the older science fiction novels I read from these 2 SF Gateway omnibuses, which are very bright yellow. The first 2 which I enjoyed the most were by Theodore Sturgeon. The first one is To Marry Medusa and the second is The Dreaming Jewels. I actually read the third book in this bind-up called Venus Plus X a couple of years ago and also quite liked it. So To Marry Medusa is an unusual alien invasion of Earth story. A piece of an alien hive mind makes it to Earth. It is consumed in a burger by a violent homeless man and sort of takes over his brain. The man is aware that there's something inside of his head talking to him, and he's doing what it wants. But this alien thing is only used to hive minds. It doesn't understand that humans are separate, and it can't do anything until it reintegrates humans into a single consciousness, even though that's didn't actually ever happen. Most of the book is actually a bunch of stories of individuals just living their everyday lives and then how eventually they're all connected by this alien trying to combine all the consciousnesses of humans. And those stories were really interesting. I was impressed at how Sturgeon quickly made all of the characters seem like people, made you really invested in those stories, even though it's a very short novel. I would almost call it a novella, it's that short. So you have a little girl who's accidentally left at a rest stop in the desert by her family, and she's wandering about and slowly starving. There's a woman who is on the verge of being date raped by a man who really wants to get into her pants, and some other characters as well. So it really shows a not great side of humanity as well, and I found the conclusions to each of those stories to actually be kind of surprising and a little bit heartbreaking as well. So this was just kind of my sudden first inkling that, oh my gosh, this is an author who really brings the characters to life. And frankly, I think that a lot of his depiction of women in his stories is surprisingly feminist for the time. And then we have The Dreaming Jewels. This is also science fiction, but there were some elements of it that made me think of dark fantasy, and in fact it has some darker elements that were almost a little bit too much for me and not to my particular taste. It's about a young boy named Horty. He is adopted and he is badly abused by his adoptive parents. And in one episode, his adoptive father slams his hand in a door which severs 3 of his fingers. Horty then runs away from home and is taken in by the self-described freaks of a traveling circus. And for about a decade, he pretends to be a female dwarf in a circus. There is something not quite human about Horty. He starts out as a little boy. He suddenly becomes a dwarf and doesn't age and doesn't get bigger. And then when he leaves the circus to kind of go back to where he came from to see what actually happened to his adoptive parents to close that chapter of his life, he grows up again. He becomes different. And it all seems to have to do with these dreaming jewels and this really freaky jack-in-the-box toy that Horty has been very attached to all of his life and may actually kind of be connected to his life force. This is about aliens kind of in disguise, and it did not go in the direction I thought it was going to. At first, I disliked the story. It wasn't pleasant. And then it started developing some of the characters from the circus, like Z, who is a female dwarf, and it kind of becomes a mother figure to Horty. She's probably one of the best characters in this book. She was amazing. And just the way she was written was so good. There's also a girl who grows up to be a young woman that Horty is attached to. She was one of the few children who was nice to him at school, who was brought back in the story as a young woman and facing basically really terrible sexual harassment in her workplace, like being practically blackmailed into going on dates with this older judge. And the way that Sturgeon handled that as well, it was like he totally recognized that women face these kind of problems in the workplace, and it's probably even worse back in like the 1960s and stuff. It was just really interesting. So I didn't find the plots of either of these stories to be particularly great, and I didn't find this to be a kind of science fiction with alien presences that I really liked either, but the way that Sturgeon wrote them, the way that he structured them, and especially the way that he wrote people really impressed me. So I definitely am going to be reading more by Sturgeon. Unfortunately, I can't say the same thing about the other two books that I read, which is quite a disappointment. I read Time is the Simplest Thing and A Choice of the Gods by Clifford D. Simak. Time is the Simplest Thing imagines a future where humans never go out to physically explore the solar system because at the time that he wrote it, we weren't sure about the Van Allen belts and radiation and space and everything. So in this future, it says we can't leave Earth. Instead, we begin to explore the solar system and the galaxy remotely with robots and with telepathy. So individuals who have a high telepathic ability are able to kind of like project their consciousness into these like robotic exploration things and explore the universe that way. One of these people, a man, he encounters an alien mind while he's out there exploring, and the company he works for, Fish Hook, is after him after that point because he is contaminated by an alien consciousness. He goes on the run. I think he actually runs away from a facility in Mexico and is headed towards South Dakota. He comes across some pockets of like telepathic communities and individuals that society is generally quite prejudiced against. A lot of this and the problems that the characters face for like their telepathic abilities is obviously a parallel to the civil rights movement and racism of the era, because this was like from the 1950s or 60s. That was the most interesting thing about this, as you could read it as like an analogy or a metaphor for the issues going on at the same time. But I could care less about the character, and I was really unimpressed at the use of telepathy and psionics in a science fiction novel like this. I was just really bored by it. Similarly, with A Choice of Gods, this one imagines a future where like almost all humans just disappeared off of Earth, like billions of people practically just disappeared all at once, and the only people living on Earth are the members of this kind of wealthy like farming family or something, and the robots that humans left behind. And then somebody finally comes back from exploring the universe and says, I think I found the humans and I think that they're coming back to Earth. But do the people living on Earth really want humanity to come back or not? I did not get this story at all, but I felt like all of the characters were very flat and uninteresting. They seemed a lot like stereotypes of other characters I've read in older science fiction. And I felt like some of the story was kind of a mess because it wasn't believable. There's no explanation. How in the world would billions of people just disappear overnight? People would start living for thousands of years and like just no. And then you have telepathy, and then you have telekinesis starting to develop, and I don't know. Possibly this is also commenting on overpopulation, the future of cities, and things like that. And I feel like Simak's other book, City, is probably a better exploration of those particular topics than this was. It was too muddled for my liking. And the last book that I want to talk about in this video is completely different from those 4 science fiction novels. It is How to Behave Badly in Elizabethan England by Ruth Goodman. I think this is an excellent follow-up if you really enjoyed How to Be a Tutor by Goodman. This seems to be the era of history that Goodman is most interested in, and this one is less about the overall big social, agricultural, technological stuff going on in the Tudor era, and much more about individual behavior, mannerisms, body language, and etiquette. And it approaches all of this from the aspect of what do you need to know in order to break the rules and perform perfectly calibrated, insulting, and offensive behavior to be, I don't know, kind of a jackass. And Goodman approaches it with a lot of her humor. She's obviously extremely passionate about this period, and she has lived the life, she's done the things, she's tried out a lot of these things, like how did you actually curtsy, how did you actually bow, and the different types of doing these things. The only thing that let down this book for me somewhat is that I feel like that approach of how do you behave badly broke down at certain places in the book. Obviously, Goodman has to describe to you what the rules and the accepted behavior were before she can tell you how to break the rules. So I think it would have been a bit of a smoother organization and structure to just go along the same lines that she used in her previous books and just dive straight into the rules and talk about examples and stuff, instead of trying to always wrench it back to talking about behaving badly. But that's the only really negative thing I can say about this. It was really informational, very educational. I'd known a lot of the broader historical stuff about the Tudor period, especially what was covered in How to Be a Tutor, but the things in here about language, about body language in particular, about the way different social classes actually moved differently, walked differently, and all that. I had no idea about those particulars, and it was really fascinating. I wouldn't say it's quite as good as her previous ones, but definitely still very interesting. Those are all 5 of the books that I wanted to talk about in this batch. It's kind of a mixed bag. I'm really happy that I discovered some more books by Sturgeon that I quite liked. I'm really excited to read more by him. I'm very disappointed about the Simak novels though. I thought I was going to love his version of science fiction, but Waystation was kind of the peak, and I've progressively liked his books less and less as I've read more of them, so but it is what it is. So I have one more video like this, another batch of 5 to do before I am caught up, and then I will hopefully get back to my usual regimen of weekly wrap-ups. Thank you so much for sticking with me through all these mini reviews. I will talk to you again soon, and until then, bye.